Hi everybody. My name's Dave West. I'm CEO of Scrum.org. I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about the future of agility. It's a bit of an oxymoron, right? Agile is all about dealing with complexity and the unknown, and I'm about to talk about the future of agility. So I don't know if I'm right. I'm just going to share some things that I've observed, some of the things and some of the practices, some of the ideas that organizations are using today to make their agile practices a little bit better. And maybe they'll become mainstream, maybe they won't. But hopefully it will be interesting and you might learn a little bit of something on the way. So we're now entering what Thomas Friedman, New York Times and Washington Post journalists called the age of accelerations. He believes ultimately, and this is Thomas Friedman's work from the book Thank You for Being Late. He also wrote a really interesting book is The World is Flat, which you may have read. Very interesting work. He wrote that we're entering the age of accelerations, and that's determined by three things. The market, which is digital globalization, the fact that you buy a car and it's been to more places than you have been. I mean, the transmission was built in Mexico. The electronics come from Germany. The fuel tank is made in China, and then it all comes on big ships and is created in a factory just outside Birmingham. We live in this world of digital global economy. I think COVID has taught us that, right? The fact that we're heavily dependent on this entire world to get the products that we take for granted. We also are entering an age where Mother Nature is really, really interesting as well. Climate change, population growth, pandemics, the fact that we've got forest fires at the moment in the United States of America. And those forest fires have actually changed the sky for me in Boston, Massachusetts. The fact that Mother Nature is behaving in a little bit more extreme manner as the amount of CO2 and the amount of heat in the world increases. And then, of course, we've got technology. Moore's Law, I know we've passed Moore's Law now and semiconductors are changing in a very different way. But the exponential growth of computing power, the fact that my phone has more computing power, it's a supercomputer, really, has more computing power than the people that went to the moon. Their computing power was significantly less than the amount of computing on my little phone. The other thing that's really changing, as part of this age of accelerations, is this change our beliefs on how we capture and create value. The previous age was all about scarcity. We live in an environment of scarcity. We succeed by capturing value from our competitors, customers, and suppliers for our shareholders in this scarcity mindset, that we're always fighting. Efficiency is the most important thing. How many of you have attended a meeting about an expense, right? A $500 expense. When you look around the room, you realize that you're actually spending more than $500 on that meeting. There's 10 of you, it's $100 an hour, we take 30 minutes. Oh my gosh. The mindset needs to change or is changing to this abundance. The opportunity that you have as knowledge workers to do amazing things. We co-create value. We work with our shareholders and our stakeholders to deliver value in different ways. We understand the relationships and the networks between our customers and their needs in different ways, and we exploit value in different ways. Vision is the most important element of this abundance mindset. We have a desire to change how we work in pursuit of this vision, this mission that we're all on. Scrum.org's mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems. Scrum is just a tool that we use that every day. Actually, not maybe every day, but certainly every sprint review. Myself and maybe Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, will always ask that question. That was a great review, but how did it help us deliver on that vision? Is there a cheaper, faster, easier way for us to exploit that vision? So my entire team and my community of 350 trainers are all in pursuit of that vision. I get emails every day saying, I think the thing we need to do is X. Now, some of them, maybe it's almost impossible for me to do, but a few end up bubbling to the top and we start work on them. Isn't it great to have everybody moving towards solving problems in a different way and delivering on that abundance mindset? So how do we navigate from this industrial mindset to this small, flexible way of working? How do we move to this different way of working is an interesting thing. You know, when we think about agility and when we think about the future of organizations, they're going to be big, but they're going to be small at the same time. Amazon is a huge organization, but when you go round, you get the feeling that the teams are relatively small, sometimes too small. The teams doing design, the teams building new things are relatively small. Obviously, the organization is huge, and they take advantage of shared services, such as AWS, to really amplify these small teams to market. Increasingly, we're seeing smaller organizations have the opportunity to work in better ways to take advantage of shared services to deliver the same value that large organizations historically did. So one fundamental shift that we're going to have to make is thinking about how we can stay as small whilst being large. Large in terms of our footprint, large in terms of our impact, large in terms of our opportunity, but small in terms of our execution, small in terms of our teams, small in terms of our number of people you have to call to get something done. So thinking about the future, one of the biggest implications is going to be the way that we work. The future, and that's where agility steps in. Obviously, you can see a lot of articles about that. You know, the future of jobs, the future of work, workers on tap, you know, is the gig economy, the relationship to the gig economy and teams, what is the future of millennial work patterns, where do we go and physically sit? That's also a really interesting question as well, right? You know, particularly as we've learned with COVID and the pandemic, we've learned that remote work might be the way that we work in the future. So what is that future? Now, there's a number of different views around this. So when we start thinking about the future of agility, we start thinking about the future of work. Now, you can see that Davos, the World Economic Forum, talked about what are the skills that people are going to need. People are going to be, complex problems. Yeah, we get that. Critical thinking, creativity, a more people-centric view of the world, working with others, EQ, emotional intelligence, being able to make entrepreneurial decisions, service, negotiation, flexible. This is what Davos said. Now, Singularity University talks about something slightly different. But they sound like quite similar. Critical thinking and problem solving. Oh, well, that's similar. Collaboration, networks. Networks is a word that they use, that both sides really use to talk about the fact that ultimately, it's a bit like startups, right? When I was running an engineering group and product group in a startup, what was really interesting was we never had enough people or enough resources to do the work that we needed to do. So we begged, borrowed, and stole it. We phoned up people. You knew if you got a phone call from me and invited me out to dinner that I needed something. That's the startup way, right? Now, interestingly, that ultimately is how we see agile teams working in organizations. The most successful ones are ones that sort of like duck and dive, wheel and deal, dare say have an entrepreneurial bent in terms of delivering the value to their customers, often in spite of the environment around us. Being able to communicate is crucial. Transparency is a fundamental to agility, but often we don't think about how we make that. One interesting thing that I've learned during the pandemic is my facilitation skills are rubbish. I'm a product person. I love to talk vision. I'm more of a minister or a politician or a preacher or a salesperson than I am a collaborator or a scientist. Now, I've realized as the CEO of Scrum.org, I need to improve those skills. And facilitation is one area that I'm trying to develop. Now, I have picked liberating structures as a mechanism to help me better facilitate conversations with my team. Now, sometimes people go, oh my God, do we have to do 1, 2, 4 all? Oh, that's driving me mad. And I'm like, come on, let's try to do it. Let's use some of these techniques to get everybody working together. So collaboration and communication are things that we need to really step up as we move to the future. And it's something that I think we're going to have to learn. Now, the other thing that's interesting is about curiosity. Asking why. Simon Sinek wrote a book called The Power of Why, right? And that book emphasizes the most important question or stance that we need to have when we go into any opportunity: curiosity. Now, I often fail in this myself. Yesterday I was on a call and we were talking about a thing that we're building, and somebody said some things that I disagreed with. So I wanted to tell them why they were wrong and why I'd already thought that and shut up and move on. But I stopped myself because I've got a big post-it that says why, ? I said, that's interesting. I was having to hold myself. You know that moment where you really want to just tell them that they're stupid? I was like, okay, why? And they told me, and they were right. Not totally right. They'd missed some stuff, but it really made me step back and say, I can see your point of view. I hadn't had that point of view. It's so easy to forget that, right? Curiosity, imagination comes from why. Yes, my vision and my ideas are, still really important, but the ability to ask why and to get to the bottom is crucial. What does all this mean for agility? What is the future of work? How does the future of Agile really sit in this new context? This different way of working, this different environment, this different set of challenges? I don't know. It's complex. It really is. That's me looking like it's complex or being surprised that somebody that I didn't know comes into the room. It's a complex problem. So let's concentrate on 3 areas to talk about: people, process, practice, and organization. Let's go through these 3 areas and look at some of the future changes to agility in these areas. Let's start with people. The world that we live in today predominantly is focused on the industrial mindset, and it drives a focus on specialization and scarcity. You get promoted not necessarily because of how you've helped the company, but the skills that you bring to that company. Now, because of that, if you're going to be a scarce resource, and therefore your worth increases in supply and demand, right? That means that you hoard that information. You don't share it. Now, a lot of people say, no, that's not true. Really? You want to be that specialist. You want to hold that key. You're the only person that can update GitHub. You're the only person that knows how RP150 works. You're the only person that really, when there's a problem, a claim ticket comes in, and a claim comes in for your insurance product. That's really complex. You're the only person that can solve that, right? Well, that's interesting. We have to change that mindset. Because ultimately, the information that's in your head, if you can share it, if you can help others do the tasks that you're doing, not only does that create more agility, but it also provides you with an opportunity to get a different point of view on those ideas. So generalists and abundance. Generalists and abundance, those 2 things need to be focused on. As an organization, we need to, if you're in an organization, we need to think about how we can level the playing field a little bit, make it easier for people to work on things. Have not, when we see, for instance, interesting sort of side note, when I was working at this startup, one of the things I like to do once in a while was see who was doing the check-ins on GitHub. So, I used to log in and look at GitHub, and I realized that most of them, 70% of them, were this one person. Over and over again, this person was doing check-ins. Massive compared to the other people. 70 versus 30% of the work, right? So I was like, well, that's ridiculous. So what did I do? I got rid of his GitHub privileges so he couldn't check in anymore. Now, the reason why I did that was to create an environment where he had to work with others, and I hoped that would force him to collaborate. Now, what it ended up doing is it caused a big mess, and I wouldn't recommend that, and don't ever do it. But the intent was to try to get him to share all of that knowledge, to partner, to pair, so that other people could be there. Because I was worried. He rode his bike into work every day. I thought he was going to get hit by a car and then we'd be in serious trouble. That was my motivation. But also the impact would be more agility, more opportunity for improvement, and also improve everybody's skills, bring the whole boat up rather than just one individual. Obviously, we still need deep technical skills, but it needs to be balanced with general knowledge of how to work, how the business operates, the problem that we're solving. We can't afford for these specialists to say, hey, I don't know anything about your problem, but this is what I'll do. We can't afford that anymore. We need those generalists, those specialists, to have a desire to understand the problem that we're solving. The other thing that's really important is that learning becomes a responsibility of me on that lifelong journey. Now, this is interesting, and this is where you'll see cultural differences in different countries. There is a tendency in certain countries where you get training by the government initially, your education, your university, and then you get training by a company. So you kind of own your destiny, but you kind of don't. You kind of just own the targets. I've got to graduate high school. I've got to graduate middle school. I've got to go to university. I've got to go, and this is what I've done. What we're seeing increasingly is that organizations need to equip their people with the skills and support to take advantage of a lifelong learning journey, to give them support, mentorship programs, the idea of cohort type training, the idea that that there's access to materials, the access to certification and learning programs, that learning can't stay in the classroom. In fact, Stephen Blank, the Hacking for Defense, the creator of Lean Startup, really, Eric Ries popularized it, I'd say, and Steve Blank really invented it at his Stanford class. What he talks about is the fact that education needs to be integrated with work, and that ultimately you need to learn in a very different way. And I think that's true. I think the future is we're all going to be learning. The other thing is there's going to be some interesting roles that become evident in the future more and more. We see organizations, the role of the Agile Coach or the Scrum Master or the Scrum Captain, there's a Cambridge company that calls them that. Often they think that's a transient role. But I think in the same way as Star Trek, you had Counselor Troy, right, on the Enterprise. What we're starting to see is that organizations need, because people ultimately the most important commodity, right? They need a professional discipline inside their organization whose sole job is to enable the amazingness of the people. Now, agility is one mechanism to do that, but professional coaching is another one. Maybe, being able to do some sort of change agent, some teaching and mentoring. They might not know all the things, but they can connect you up. And also, ultimately, these people are assessed, and the value that they deliver is not measured by their contribution directly. It's measured by the outcomes from the teams. Ultimately, we need to invest in our people, so we need people that are helping these teams deliver on their full potential. Many organizations call that an Agile Coach. I think maybe the coach word is interesting because it only implies one stance, but these people are great facilitators. They're enablers. They help the people remove impediments. They do professional coaching. They also do some change agent stuff, some mentoring stuff, or certainly connect the right people up. It's an interesting future role. The other interesting key role in the future is around product leadership. And I think this is an area that is probably the most difficult. There's an interesting book about Toyota that was written probably 30 years ago and then translated from Japanese. This book talks not about the Toyota production system. It talks about the Toyota design system, how they design cars, how they design high quality cars, right? So what's interesting about this is they talk about a lead designer. That designer isn't a person that uses a drawing board and that. It's more like a product owner. They're responsible for delivering value. They manage the trade-offs necessary to deliver value. They think about the profit and loss, the business case for that value. And then ultimately they understand or manipulate the technology opportunities to deliver that value. Now, it's a really interesting perspective because this was written 30 some years ago, right? But at the heart, most organizations don't really have a formal discipline around product management. They have business product management, they have technical product management, but they need the intersection. Now, I believe that to be effective in business today, you need technology, and to be successful with technology, you need to understand the business. So I believe that the future, you're going to see increasingly this role become super important and become more professional in organizations. And that they will be both business and technologists. We talk about business and technology. Ultimately, this is the coming together of those two worlds. The other interesting thing is the role of the developers or the people doing the work. What we see is creators grouped together in purpose. Teams, for most complex work, teams is a necessary thing. Now, we learn from Daniel Pink that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are crucial for that. So that means that we need to have teams that are self-managed, that have this environment that allows them to develop autonomy, mastery, and purpose. It allows them to work together in some sort of self-organized way and also have a clear direction, self-direction based on business goals. So if you think of product leadership, providing that goals, that direction, we see teams then picking up that and running with it and using the environment around them to deliver that. That means that ultimately these creators need to be T-shaped or pie-shaped or cone-shaped. Everybody needs to understand the business problem. Now, they might not be experts in it. They might be learning, and sometimes that's the best way. That naive and innocent approach is really good for actually often building better solutions because assumptions are less built in, as it were. And then they need to have specialist skills necessary to deliver the product. So ultimately, the future of work or the future of people is you build these broad technical skills, broad business skills to understand the problem and how to work with that particular business. Maybe it's insurance, maybe it's banking, maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's oil, maybe it's energy, maybe it's any of these things, automotive. And then you have these deep technical skills that help support that. Now, what's interesting is when I started work in the 90s, and yes, I am that old, in the 90s, I was a software engineer. I happened to work in an insurance company. I didn't really care what the problem was. I cared about building software, and I was really specialist in that. And nobody expected me to learn the business. In fact, they wrote these really long specs, they were always wrong, by the way, that allowed me to build my code without understanding the problem. In fact, when I asked questions, they'd say, you don't understand that. Now, many of those questions turned out to be bugs in the product later, but, fair enough. It was a long time ago, right? That isn't the way we have to work today. That is not the right way. We have to have specialist skills supported by a community. We have to have individuals that also are willing to build those broad skills, that pie-shaped, T-shaped, cone-shaped. So, if that's what people have to be, what environment do they work in? Oh, that's meant to say stakes, not stacks, by the way. Agile process becomes table stakes. That's that's what happens when you don't have a good definition of done, right? Agile processes become table stakes for all work. Team practices such as facilitation, use of tools, powerful questions become the domain of not a few, not these agile coaches, though they may bring and mentor people on those things. It becomes everybody. Design thinking, lean startup, the ideas of business canvas, the ideas of customer personas, that stuff become more integrated into standard working practice. Obviously, the fundamentals are still agility. If you've watched my other talk, I'm not going to bore you with those. If you haven't, empiricism, self-managed, and continuous improvement are at the heart of that. And then this professionalism on top of that, this idea of values, discipline, outcomes, and community. So you've got to build agile processes that at the heart support empiricism, and every day you need to ask that allow self-management. So you have it's a simple process, right? And that encourage improvement of both the product and the team, supported by a value-centric organization with discipline at the key. So that may manifest itself in things like definition of done, WIP limits, things like that. And that there's a clear definition of the customer and everybody's moving towards that. Even if you're a service team that's providing infrastructure for other teams that are actually doing the customer work, your customer are those teams, right? And then we have community based around that. The other thing that's really interesting, this is a slide from Gartner, is this idea of lean startup, design thinking, and agility. These things need to be meshed in a way that allows us to effectively work on problems that solve problems that delivers value to customers. All of it is about the problem, the opportunity that we're working to, the customer's needs and how they connect to that opportunity, and then a mechanism for delivering frequently to that customer, observing and feeling that. Now, I don't really like that diagram. Perhaps a better way is to think about this. Think about this in a plan, sense, respond. We're going to be doing 3 disciplines of process: design thinking, lean startup, and Scrum. Now, at certain points in the life cycle, we'll be doing a lot more design thinking and lean startup stuff than delivery stuff. And at the end, we'll be doing a lot more delivery stuff and a lot less design thinking. But we use the same feedback loop over and over again with a different sprint goal and maybe different product goal as we learn, as we navigate this life cycle. The other thing that's really interesting, so if that's process, so we're thinking about a process that has to embrace design thinking, lean startup, and some sort of agile execution engine, something that allows us to continuously look at the problem, continuously look at the customer, and continuously execute against it. What sort of organization context do we need to have in place in the future? We need to build organizations that are upside down. We need to build organizations where the most important construct in the organization are the teams and people. We need to align those organizations to the customer and to the value stream that allows that customer to get some value. We need to fund and budget in that way. And we need to build an organization that's people and learning centric. If we don't do that, we're going to be in trouble. So you can do that by creating a studio. You know, KLM is a great example of a studio in the Netherlands. They created a digital studio where they got rid of all the legacy and they built their own capabilities, initially in an aircraft hangar. They then moved into offices. They created everything from the ground up, from HR, from contracts management, from all that. Yes, they begged, borrowed and stealed that from KLM Air France when they could, but ultimately they were given the free rein to do what was necessary to deliver on a digital set of product goals, a series of digital products that they wanted to deliver to the organization. And it worked really, really well. And the other thing that's an interesting approach, by the way, the problem with this, and the other thing about this is that if you look at John Kotter, he talks about this in his latest book. He thinks this is the only way you can really create systemic change in an organization. You basically break it into a different organization. The challenge with this is these antibodies that the organization has, governance, compliance, the PMO, start fighting. Initially, they're fine with this because it's small. As it becomes more politically powerful, they start fighting this antibody, which can cause lots of problems. However, it's an interesting way of thinking about how we deliver change. The other thing that's interesting is how we do funding. Ultimately, we need to change the way we fund. We need to fund on outcomes, maybe even on products, and then incrementally decide what the outcomes we're seeking are, and then align teams to that, see what the value is that we'll get from those outcomes. That gives us a budget, and then incrementally deliver value against that. We need to think about a very different way of funding. Now, Beyond Budgeting talks about this in some detail. Fund teams value streams. We know how much the value stream's worth. We know how much investment we want to make in this. That allows the teams to be funded, and then they can engage with the business to deliver the work that's necessary. And that allows teams to pull the work as necessary. So, what are we talking about today? What is the future? I think the future is going to be, ultimately, people working in very people-centric organizations. They're going to be T-shaped or cone-shaped. I think two roles will become more and more professional. The role of the Agile Coach, the role of the product owner or product leader. And then teams themselves will become more functional in regard to the pie-shaped, cone-shaped sort of skill set. And that ultimately will be the delivery capability in most organizations. I think we'll support those with community, and I think we'll enable it in lifelong learning. We'll create an environment around that. We'll also create processes or allow processes to evolve focused on three sort of bodies of thought: design thinking, agility, and some sort of business canvas, lean startup kind of approach. Ultimately, all of these at their heart have the customer and have empiricism at their heart. We'll then build organizations that allow empiricism to drive how we plan, how we budget, and how we respond. Think big, be small, act quickly, grow slow, create safety, encourage courage, and love what you're doing, because that's where the magic really happens. That is the future, and I'm excited to be part of it. Thank you for your time. My name's Dave West, and I know that our journey is just beginning.